Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Epic Voyages Radio on Inception Radio Network. My name is Bill Forte, and I will be your host tonight.
And I'm your host, your co-host, Carol Carl.
Okay, before we begin the show, I'd like to remind our listeners that you can listen to Epic Voyages Radio every Monday night on Inception Radio Network, beginning at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. And Epic Voyages Radio is also rebroadcast on darkmatterradio.net on Fridays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time.
And Epic Voyagers has recently added several guest hosts to our lineup, including us. And what a roster of topics and guests we have coming up. Be sure to go to epicvoyagers.com at least weekly and look at our schedule for topics and guests. You'll definitely want to mark Monday nights on Inception Radio and Friday nights on Dark Matter Radio Network so that you don't make any missings of that action. Coming up in just the next few weeks, we're going to be talking to some big names about some amazing topics. There'll be Ted Peters and his book, UFOs, God's Chariots. Len Kasten in his book, Secret Journey to Planet Serpo. John Greenwald will come on and talk about his site, The Black Vault. And Ray Hernandez with the Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters, or FREE. And all these shows are going to be archived at Inception Radio Network and also on Epic Voyagers YouTube channel. So if you miss one, we got you covered.
And you can also ask questions for our guests at the Inception Radio Network chat room. Just be sure to put them in caps so that Carol and I can spot them easier. You can also call in with any questions for our guests at 888-919-2355. Okay, tonight, our guest will be Louis Buff Parry, and his website is louisbuffparry.com. That's LOUISBUFFPARRY.com. And we are announcing the premiere of his new YouTube channel tonight, which is called Truth in the Buff. Right now, he has 2 videos posted for viewing, and they are called Oak Island Confessions and Omissions, Part 1 and 2. So go check that out after the show.
Sounds like a perfect way to round up this evening.
Oh, yeah, after the show, I'm definitely going over there and checking that out right away.
See you there.
Okay, Louis Buff Parry is an international scholar, a renowned code cracker, inventor, and Renaissance man of the arts and sciences. Tonight, we will be discussing specifically his work with the cuneiform artifacts found in North America, and also his groundbreaking decoding of the Shepherd's Monument, and the history and mystery of Oak Island and the Money Pit. So let's bring on Buff. Buff, are you there?
I sure am, Bill.
How are you doing tonight?
Oh, very well, very well. And before I forget, for those who do tune into the YouTube channel, Truth in the Buff, there is a third part that is not posted yet, and you're all going to be left hanging, which I think my manager of the station did on purpose.
A little tease there.
Yeah,
a cliffhanger.
Exactly.
Buff,
Yes.
what type of videos do you plan on putting on that YouTube channel, by the way?
They're videos that we are making ourselves. There may be some other videos that we put on that are not of our own making, but are relevant to the general themes of the channel. So there are going to be a few videos where I'm sort of rebuffing everything's
Pun intended.
You'll be hearing this name a whole lot of times, Buff. Where I've received some fair amount of criticism and I think undeserved misunderstanding in a lot of the areas that I've done work, and so we're going to be addressing that to kind of clear the air and make certain that it is understood what it is I've been working on in different fields of endeavor that seem to have locked me in as one of the head Illuminati members and things like that.
So in other words, you want to set some records straight.
Exactly.
A little authenticity, please.
Yes, you got it.
Buff, you just mentioned about your work. Can you just give our audience a brief summary of some of your renowned achievements and great-breaking work as a scientist and codecracker?
Well, right now I'm working on some new aspects to the Voynich manuscript decipherment. That's a complex issue. It's a very mystifying manuscript that has been carbon-14 dated to about 1410, 1420 in terms of the age of the vellum sheets. And those are, of course, made of animal hide vellum sheets. And so we know that that the sheets themselves go back to the very early 1400s when ink and paint started to enter the picture. Obviously will come later after the book is assembled. And then people in those days used to do manuscript illumination and things like that. In this case, it's a script that has no counterpart. There's no, comparison to it anywhere on Earth. There are a whole lot of images of octagons, for example, and salamanders, two of my favorite motifs through human cultural history. So all that said, what I've put together more recently is the significance of the salamander and the octagons as guides with which to decipher the manuscript, and also the custodial chain of people who have had this manuscript is in it and of itself very telling about the identity of the manuscript itself. So that's my current one of my current projects.
And that's interesting. I'm sorry, Carol.
Oh, I was just going to say I stumbled upon those images on the internet several years ago. Little did I know I would be talking to an expert in that area, but they're really quite astonishing. Somebody could you spell it for everybody so they can do a search later? It's
Voynich.
Right, and would be Voynich manuscript. Would that be a good way to?
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, but anyway, back to our main topic.
Yeah, Louis, you mentioned also about the octagons. Now, is there some connection with the octagon and Chief Joseph tablet as far as the pouch that he was wearing with the Star of Asher? That is shaped. Okay, go ahead.
Definitely. First, on the Star of Asher, this is an octagon that is a very not complex, but stylized type of octagon, not like a normal octagon, if there is such a thing as a normal octagon. The Star of Asher is on the flag of the Assyrian people. Assyrian people are the last, really the only truly indigenous people of Iraq and Syria, although Kurds would consider themselves to be indigenous, and a Yazidi group also is thought to be indigenous, certainly by themselves. But the Assyrians are definitely indigenous. They've had a continuous occupation of approximately the same lands for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So they have found, the Assyrians themselves have found a striking similarity with the chief of the Nez Perce back in the 1870s, Chief Joseph, and a beaded Star of Asher on one of his pouches that attached to his belt. But he also had, when he was arrested, this was at the end of what were called the Indian Wars in America, and he was arrested right almost on the border of what is now the province I live in, Alberta, and the state of Montana. When he was arrested, the general who arrested him found a clay tablet that was approximately an inch in all directions, and it bore a cuneiform inscription. And the cuneiform inscription was impressed on both sides of this clay tablet, obviously when the clay was still wet. That's how cuneiform worked. When it was impressed into clay, the clay had to still be relatively moist. So it's a very interesting item, and it's attached to, at least in my mind, to a couple of other, well, actually 4 other artifacts that have been found in North America, 2 cuneiform inscribed items in Georgia, 1 in Ohio, the one that I just mentioned, and then what's called a Dilmun ironstone artifact that was found on Shawnee Creek in Oklahoma. Okay. So, I mean, we could keep going on this, or maybe wend ourselves to.
Actually, actually, I wanted you to touch first on the Chief Joseph tablet, because not only it's about his pouch, but also on the stone itself, doesn't it indicate a lamb or some type of indication to a priestess of some kind on that stone?
Yes, it's a recording of a transaction of one sacrificial lamb for a ceremony that in my opinion, in my interpretation, is a ceremony that was celebrated each year on the same day of the same month. And it would be the initiation of young women into a priesthood. Or priestesshood, but I'm going to stay up with the age that we're in now, and we'll just say priesthood.
I like that.
And there's another artifact that kind of matches that description, and that's what's called the lead tablet that was found in Georgia. So, except in that case, the reference is to several lambs and goats for sacrificial purposes.
Now, the one that it was found in Georgia, I believe Miss Hearn found that in her flower garden while she was digging
is an amazing, talk about Americana. Here's a woman presumably with a shovel by herself, and was it flowers she was planting? Do we know that, or vegetables?
Yeah, well, I'm on record saying vegetable garden, but I can tell you now it is definitely a flower garden that she was preparing. I made one slight error in my recall of what it was that she was preparing the garden bed for, and
of course there are some edible flowers, so we have to kind of fudge maybe on that a little bit.
As a child, I discovered many edible flowers. Right. I was a flower eater.
Oh, really?
Well, you've heard of the lotus eaters.
I was about to say, is there a connection there? Okay.
If there is, we're not going to get into it on
all right.
And that stone, that's the second stone that we're speaking about, the Hearn stone. Is that similar in size, or is it larger?
No, it's much larger than the Chief Joseph stone, the Chief Joseph tablet. Of the three, there's really only one stone that we're talking about. The three that I'm focusing on the most, and it's the iron stone that has the Dilmun inscription, and the Dilmun inscription is Dilmun symbols that together make up an image, and the image is the image of the goddess Inanna, who was in effect the first major paramount goddess in human history in terms of a goddess that was recorded, and she started the continuum that led to ultimately to Venus.
Wow.
Now, how far back does the Dilmun civilization? What is the era for that? How long ago, Buff, is that?
Well, it could go back 8,200 years.
Wow.
I fixed that date because that is the date when the Gulf, the Arabo-Persian Gulf, was engulfed in water, because there was a water level rise around the world due to the pulsing exiting of the backup flood waters from the melting of the glaciers right here in Canada. And Hudson Strait had a dam, an ice dam that collapsed, and the miles high water levels went gushing into the Atlantic, and that caused this collective all around the world rise of the water level. And so in that Gulf area, there used to be an oasis, and this is now proven by a friend and colleague of mine, Jeremy I. Rose, and the oasis was a very fertile oasis. The Tigris and Euphrates drained to the north through what's today called Iraq into what is today called the Persian Gulf or Arabo-Persian Gulf. And so as the water rose, it engulfed this oasis, and the operating theory, which really to me is no longer a theory, but we'll call it that. Okay. The operating theory is that the people who lived on that oasis, on this super fertile oasis, more fertile than the Nile Delta and so on, had obviously had time to get in their reed boats and sail to the shores, whether it would be the western shore or the eastern shore from this oasis. And if it was the eastern shore, then we're talking about today's Iran. If it's the western shore, we're talking about Saudi Arabia, even Kuwait to the north,
right.
and Bahrain and
Qatar.
so forth, and
Yes.
Qatar as you go further south, in the Emirates, and of course, Dilmun, or pardon me, it used to be called Dilmun and Dilmun Nituki, but Bahrain is seen as one of the major centers of where these people who then formulated, if they hadn't already, the Dilmun script, where they lived and did that and made Dilmun seals and things like that for royalty and the like.
Now, this was also to be referred to as Nituki, I believe.
Yes, in the Sumerian cuneiform writings, there is a reference to Dilmun Nituki, and so Dilmun would be the empire, if you will, similar to the Phoenician Empire, being a trade sort of mercantile, empire, and Nituki is a reference to an island, a sacred island of fire, or a glowing, illuminated sacred island. And when you break down the Nituki, that's exactly what you get. The Ni stands for what becomes, the term bitumen. And that's to me really, really fascinating for all kinds of reasons we probably don't have time to get into tonight. But the other two roots, combine into this triconsonantal root term, where a word construct, come out to mean the island, the sacred island of fire, or the sacred glowing island. A few different combinations like that.
Okay. Now, I just want to know a little bit more about the Dilmun civilization that encompassed Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, and the eastern province of Saudi Arabia, and their trading center, and how they traded with the Indus Valley civilization and pre- and co-dynastic Egyptians back during that period.
Okay. The word Bahrain in Arabic means where the waters meet.
Oh.
Majma al-Bahrain is the fullest expression of where they meet. So Bahrain, literally means two waters, but it implies where the two waters meet. Some people think that has to do with the fresh sweet water that came up from and through the island, filtered and all the rest, mixed with the salt water of the Gulf. And so what was your question again? I see some questions.
It was a very intense question.
The reason I got off track is that I see some questions that are flashing up here. Has Buff read the works of John Ackerman or Barry Fallon? I totally distracted you.
Those are coming in from the chat room. So,
okay.
Hello, everybody in chat. Hello, you guys. They're amazing.
Hello, our good friends in the chat room. But,
oh my goodness.
Buff, we'll pass those questions as they come in, so you don't have to.
Okay, I won't read them anymore.
Try not. Look away.
I just
so Bahrain is the name of an island, and it's actually an archipelago. There's the largest island of the archipelago called Bahrain, and then there are these smaller little islands that go almost in all directions from the major central island. That island was the trade hub of the Indus Valley civilization,
right?
And that's to the east. So you have to come out the Indus River in boats, in ships, whatever, and find your way coming west, and then up into the Gulf, and then to the island of Bahrain. That would be for the people coming out of the Indus Valley civilization. Then Sumer, straight to the north.
Just one tiny interruption. How long would something like that approximately take? Are we talking months or?
No. A matter of weeks.
Weeks. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
If you look on a map and you see where the Indus River flows out into the sea, the Arabian Sea, and then just follow the coast to the west, and then up into the Gulf. So that's
okay.
That's the Indus Valley. Then straight north of Bahrain would be Sumer, and Dilmun and Sumer, and first Dilmun and then Sumer. And Dilmun was coexistent with the Indus Valley civilization's original roots, and they have a relationship actually in some of the writing forms. But Sumer was the really big civilization, and that was up around Iraq and Iran. Well, not to forget this whole Persian side of it, because they were also part of the Dilmun period, and show some of the same artifacts. So we've got those two main civilizations of the Indus Valley and of Sumer. Now look, so we have east, north, go west, and you've got Egypt.
Right.
There's evidence in the graves that have been excavated, the pre-dynastic Egyptian graves, that lapis lazuli had been traded to Egyptians even before their dynastic civilization rose. So where did that lapis lazuli come from? It came from what's today the easternmost extension of Afghanistan that borders with China. That's the world's treasure trove of lapis lazuli, which was probably one of the most valued gems, not semi-precious, but truly precious gems in those days, to all of those civilizations. So that means we have, and they would have, the bulk of that lapis lazuli would have been brought to Bahrain for trade purposes by the by the Indus Valley people in exchange with the Dilmun, and then the subsequent Sumerians and others who came to rule, Bahrain. So at one time, especially once the dynastic rise occurred in Egyptian history, you've got early dynastic Egyptian traders, you've got Sumerian traders, and you have traders from the Indus Valley. The three huge civilizations that totally impacted the world, and still do. They still do in a reverberating, kind of resonating way.
Oh, yes.
All exchanging goods on this island of Bahrain, but also Qatar. Not to forget, Qatar is just right next to Bahrain, and it projects out as well into the Gulf. So, sort of projects out. Those two sites would be the major, I think, locus of where the major trade happened, and most people conclude that the majority of that was on the island of Bahrain.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Buff, I just have a similar question dealing with the Sumerians in a way here. In the Mesopotamian poem Gilgamesh, the Sumerians describe Dilmun as a paradise garden. Could this have inspired the Garden of Eden in the Book of Genesis?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The ultimate garden would have been that oasis I mentioned that got flooded by the rising waters.
Right.
And then all the legends and the romance and the motifs and all the rest of it just got translated and transferred onto Bahrain and region. So there are all sorts of indicators that really Genesis in particular, Bereshit as it would be called in Hebrew, in the beginning, that's what that means. That almost all of the major accounts were taken from the cuneiform inscribed Sumerian records, and that would include, the flood, even.
Okay.
And we know the flood memory would have been much fresher then if in 8,200 years ago there was this massive flood that engulfed the oasis of the Arabo-Persian Gulf. That's still, in terms of oral traditions and so forth, that's still pretty much in the memory. So the first accounting of the flood you can find with the Gilgamesh and Kaidu Utnapishtim story. A real quick and curious coincidence, if we want to call it.
Oh, yes,
Okay.
yes, please. Love them.
Is Utnapishtim. Utnapishtim was the old man, kind of the wise man of the hill, that seems to appear in all of these legends and stories. His name means where the male studs are. So if you have a big boat and you're trying to get male and female together, you're going to be looking for for male studs of all the species that you could get onto the boat. Now in the Cree language of North America, and the Cree people are the second largest First Nation of North America, second only to the Navajo Apache, which are part of the same. Really, they are virtually the same, the Navajo and the Apache. In the Cree language, which is not directly related to the Navajo Apache complex, the Otanapisatim, Otanapishtim, right? Would you say it fast? You have exactly the same two words. Means essentially the same thing. Where it's Uta or Ata means where in Cree and in Dilmun Sumerian. And then Napis means young male, and Atim means horse or dog or a few other animals too. So you have the same essential meaning and the idea of young male stud animals. It built into that word. Wow. That also is the name of the old guy who's consulted by Gilgamesh after Enkidu perishes.
Okay, now we have a question from the chat room, and the question is from Wolfgal. So, are these cuneiform tablets that are found in North America, did they originate from ancient Sumeria, Bahrain? That's the question, Buff.
Okay. We have some more testing to do, and there's kind of three phases to this whole project. The first phase isn't really quite complete yet. The second phase is kind of virtually completed, even though we have to get through the first to get to the second. What we would like to do is test Chief Joseph's clay tablet for some possible unique aspects and contents that would indicate where that clay was mined or quarried, or where it came from. The idea, the prevailing idea is, since these artifacts have been vetted, and particularly the Chief Joseph clay tablet has been completely vetted, and there are several reasons why it has to be 100% authentic. Because they relate to each other and speak to the same region in terms of their of the content of what they have to say. It's my view that they came from the old world over here. The South American examples that are found in Chile and Bolivia are mixed iconographically with the local indigenous motifs. So you have bowls that have on the outside of them the indigenous, local artistic representations, and then on the inside you have pure, perfect cuneiform writing. And so what does that indicate? It indicates that there was real integration that went on between peoples, between the First Nations down in South America and the Sumerians who arrived there, or whomever else may have been, arriving and using cuneiform script. Up here, this does not suggest that there wasn't integration, because the oral tradition of Chief Joseph was, I'm going to pretend I'm him for a moment. My ancient ancestors received this item from some visitors from abroad, and they went amongst us, which implies that they, integrated with the Nez Perce people, and that they were going to return. That's Chief Joseph's oral tradition. So, It seems to me that, and I accept Chief Joseph's oral tradition almost completely because his item is so compelling, and there's no possible way that there can be any monkey business. Not in 1877. After I drink a little sip of water, I'll tell you why.
No problem.
Oh, and also now, is this the part where everything in the bags they were all traditionally interlinked? There was not just something that, this is bright and shiny, I'll put it in here. It was something with a meaning, with a tradition.
Yeah, it started from generation to generation.
Exactly. Yes. We're talking about people with profound ancient cultures and civilizations of the Americas, and they weren't crows or ravens who just picked any sparkling item, just because it sparkled. But that is a kind of a that is not a prevailing notion, but it's one held by a lot of people, including academics I've dealt with right here at the University of Alberta. The idea was, Chief Joseph would have had all kinds of unrelated trinkets in his medicine bag. Well, this is completely impossible, and it shows the ignorance of so-called specialists and academics in these respective fields that make you an Indian expert.
Yes.
There is no possible way that you would have a mixture of items in a medicine bag that didn't intimately relate to each other, one to the next. So he did have other items that are referred to, and my understanding is that they're in the same location where that clay tablet is now reposed, which is West Point Military Academy in New York. And I want to be visiting there very soon, which is still part of the phase one project, phase one of the project, to get this thing up and moving as a artifact display.
So, Buff, by phase one, you mean that you need to go to each of the locations of these three artifacts and actually go there and do research and look them over and look over the documentation from the past people that have researched them themselves also? What is that going to entail for you to do to go to get possession, I will just say, so to speak, so that you can present this? Because I know you're planning an exhibit in Qatar with these three exhibits. With these three artifacts. So what is encompassed with the phase one aspect?
Okay, well, let's first look at the minimalist and then the maximalist possibility.
Why not?
So the minimalist would be these three artifacts. Okay. The maximalist would be the other two that we know are available for study in North America, one in Ohio and a second one in Georgia. And if it's possible, include some of the artifacts that are in Bolivia and in Chile with this, because it'll show the difference in visits and the types of visitors, and that in one case there seems to be. Are you there?
Yes,
oh yeah.
We're here.
Okay. Everything just went blank.
Oh no!
It wasn't.
No,
it wasn't me alone going blank. Believe me.
All right, we're fine.
Okay, so that's the maximalist option. The phase one is this, the completion of the study phase. I've dealt with the owner, or the titular owner of the lead tablet that is in Georgia, and he's the president of a university. And it's the university that really, owns this artifact that's now kept in a local museum in Lagrange. And so he introduced to me some protocols that were required for me to be able to, really negotiate this item to take on tour. And it's not that he has said no at all, but I have to meet, certain requirements,
right.
And those are to read through. In person, not electronically, not through mail or otherwise, but to be there in Georgia and read through the files that exist surrounding this lead tablet. The lead tablet was discovered in 1963, and again from the flower bed,
yes,
when Mrs. Joe Hearn in those days.
Mrs. Joe Hearn.
He took your husband's first name as well.
Right.
there's no reason to think there's anything fishy at all about it. And she was totally earnest and I think honest in every detail that she provided when she brought it in. But people naturally, with especially lead, because with a lead tablet, you have to kind of pour the molten lead in place to make the lead tablet, and because of that, that takes a lot of work. So if it did happen in the old country, whichever part of this Sumerian empire we're talking about, and it was a vast empire. It may have been pre-manufactured, a blank slate, and then carved over here, or it was on board for whatever reason. The interrelationship between these three artifacts is, I think, quite intimate, and it does suggest that there was one boat with a number of people on it who were somehow part of the trading hub that existed, especially on the island of Bahrain and on the tip of Qatar, and that it for whatever reason got lost or was part of an ancient trading network. We can go on a tangent on this one. Right. I'll do it real quickly with you. There are collections of what are called Cypriomonita shells. These are cowrie shells. Moneta means money. So cowrie money shells that only grow from the Indian Ocean to the Hawaiian Islands on the bottom of this of the ocean, of the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. That's their only habitat. So to have thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of these shells over in North America in the Copina cultural collections, that's the American Southeast. Copina stands for copper and galena. Long story, we won't get into. To have those dating back into the millennia of years is stunning. Where did they come from? How did they get here? It has to be with the trading mission, because those shells were used as money throughout Eurasia, Africa, and the Asian Southeast. So they were money already. And they were obviously used. Hudson Bay Company adapted them as money to trade with indigenous trappers.
Right.
People who bought it. Yes.
Buff also, it would also indicate that they must have also traveled to South America and Central America, because aren't these artifacts found all over the Americas? It just couldn't have just been specifically North America. They must have been all over the Americas.
Yeah, I just described that have been found in Chile and Bolivia.
Okay,
amazing.
So that really is incredible. And I know recently you just had a presentation with at the Sucker Creek First Nation Reserve in Alberta with Chief Jim Badger, and I think you proposed the Institute for the Studies of Indigenous Anomalies. Does this correlate with the artifacts? What is the connection, and what is the goal and the focus of this institute, which is ISA, the acronym? What exactly is it all about?
The ISIA. It's about studying, what the so-called specialists say shouldn't be here, but are here, and why they've created this convenient catch-all term of anomaly. They'll call these things anomalies, even if they're vetted, proven to be non-hoax, and you can't hoax a cowrie shell that's dug up, from several feet underground, and in part of stratigraphy that's well known and identified by archaeologists and geologists. So they don't know what to do with it, though, because they don't have the paradigms, they don't have the frameworks to fit these so-called anomalies into. So they call them anomalies, put them on a shelf, and leave them, and then they don't bother with what the implications are to these artifacts until something else happens. So, like, for example, when they found that the Vikings, were here 500 years before Columbus, which totally, rocked the hearts and souls of the Italians and the Spaniards, who fought over whether Columbus was Italian or Spanish.
Right.
That was devastating to both, both of his fan clubs, because he obviously wasn't the first European to be here. And I don't think, too very many people took that very seriously, for the last century with what has been found. So the the institute that we want to form is going to address issues of those cowrie shells. We know, and the fact that Hudson Bay Company took them up and used them as money, which is literally what the Latin word for that species of cowrie shell, Cypria moneta, the cowrie money.
Amazing.
It is, and the indigenous people already had this real desire for them and use for them. They were fertility symbols. If I may be blunt and frank with you, speaking scientifically, they look like vaginas, and they would travel with another shell called Dentalia that was only found on the northwest coast of Vancouver Island of this continental area, British Columbia. And those were gastropods that would stand upright, and they look like erect phalluses. So the two would go together. Money, despite rumors to the contrary, really comes out of a fertility matrix. Money was seen as something that would enhance and extend and expand fertility. That is its origin, and out of need, obviously. But when you get into, the surplus and the extravagant and exotic aspects of trade, money comes into the picture directly squared with fertility issues of the culture and the spirituality of the people who are using it. So, we want to look at those shells. We want to look at these cuneiform inscribed artifacts. There are several different areas to venture into without getting all goofed up with diffusionism and right. Barry Fell, who always pops up in the picture when this kind of discussion comes along. I knew him. I worked with him. We had terrible disagreements, and I'm kind of happy to say that we did, because he did some wrongful things. He was a great zoologist at Harvard. But in this epigraphic context, everything was, about diffusion. My point on this very quickly is,
yes.
I think indigenous people could make pyramids on their own. Thank you. They didn't need either Anunnaki or ancient Egyptians coming over and teaching them how to do it. Pyramids are inherent in our psyches as a geometric shape. And stepped pyramids are so logical; they withstand all weather conditions. It just makes sense. A teepee is something that has an apex to it.
Yes.
Look at architecture around the world through time. It's functional. First off.
And then the form.
Yeah, I'm not taking the magic and the mysticism away from ancient Egypt. That's not what I'm doing, or from the Mayans and the Aztecs.
No, of course not.
But Buff, let me ask you a question. I don't want to. I just want to be a little devil's advocate here. But couldn't it be possible that some of the indigenous peoples back then could have, if it was the Sumerians or Phoenicians, whoever it may have been, who have had this trade establishment here with the Americas, could it be possible that some of the indigenous peoples went over there and they witnessed structures and they came back and incorporated that with their own style of building? Is that possible?
Very much so. You remember that 8,200 year figure, 8,200 years ago, or 8,200 BC, but there's a debate about whether it's 8,200 BC or 8,200 years from now. Regardless, we know that there was funerary architecture over 6,000 years ago, between 6,000 and 7,000 years ago, that lined the coast of maritime Canada, a special type of funeral architecture. Using stones, large to small or small to large, and red ochre to put all over the harpoons that were used to hunt whales with, and so forth. With those are older over here than they are in the Breton area of France, where they're also found. They're like 700 to 800 years older over here than the oldest ones found on the coast of France. So that implies that there was certainly some kind of navigation going on between Eastern North America and Western European Atlantic coastal regions.
Right.
But what about going into the Mediterranean? Well, it turns out the first three words used by ancient Egyptians for God
yes.
are in the Cree language. All three.
Mm-hmm.
No, we've already done
that. That is amazing.
That is amazing.
Totally. Munto, in the Cree language here, there's Kichimanto and Machimanto. One is like the good God, and one is the evil God, or, the devil, if you will. I mean, Some people don't like that translation. I understand why. But to use, Western European religions and the Abrahamic religions and so on, it's the contrast of black and white, dark and light, and all of that we're talking about with the Cree linguistic construct of Kitsimanto and Machimanto. So, but Manto is the first word for God recorded in ancient Egypt. And then there's this very strange word, Katapechikit, the word I just used is approximately the sound in both the Cree language and in ancient Egyptian, and it means the one who owns and controls all things.
Wow.
And so on. So there's a whole lot of other lexical examples that would suggest there was some kind of a trade. We know that the Navajo and Apache lexicon or dictionary has all kinds of items that are still being spoken in eastern Siberia by the Ket people, who are under great study right now because they're speaking a language that is only over in North America called Dene, which is what the Navajo and Apache speak, and many, many First Nations up here in Canada. So, there's nothing, there's no pushing of an envelope or far-fetched about finding ancient linguistic roots that bind up, people around the world. There is something called Proto-Dene Caucasian. And under that title, this is in today's linguistics, science of linguistics. Okay. Under that title is ancient Basque, Sumerian, and the Dene languages we're talking about, Navajo and Apache. So, the linguists seem to have no problem with recognizing the extent of cross-fertilization, linguistically speaking, around the world, many, many, many thousands of years ago. That I think a lot of other, and I use the term Indian experts in a very derogatory way, as you may have guessed by now. Yes.
You know what's interesting? I was reading somewhere when I was doing the research, and I read that the Assyrians used to sing a Rahway song that was sung by the men and women, and it's very similar to that of the Native Americans and their songs and chants. So I kind of found that also a little connection there, as far as even with the music, there was some type of connection as well. I don't know if you're aware of that, but I found that in my research.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. Actually, before we get to break, Buff, there's a question from the chat room.
Okay.
And it's from JB, Jim Bob Short, and he wants to know, does the guest relate to Zechariah Sitchin and the translations of Mauro Biglino? If you're aware of their work.
I'm aware of Zechariah Sitchin. My problem is the rush to judgment and conclusion that I find with Zechariah and with others, in his direction. There's so much uncertainty and mystery about all of this that, it's one thing to build a construct that you call a theory or an hypothesis. It's another thing to be putting forward ideas that are presented as true, and that the findings are conclusive. So I part company from that direction. I think the mysteries, speak for themselves as mysteries and need to be probed and much more deeply investigated. But I would not want to have an operating theory when I deal with the data, with the evidence, and only then thereby prove my theory. I would rather just be neutral, look at it all, know that there's something strange going on, and draw a conclusion after the fact, not enter the realm of study with a conclusion.
Right.
And that's just a difference in approach. And so, I don't condemn these people, but I don't really agree with their methodology. And I'm a little bit leery about their conclusions. In the face of wonders that are out of this world, literally, we don't need to push envelopes or push things together that don't really fit.
Exactly. Once again, I'm reminded of Carl Sagan's "The Demon-Haunted World," which really addresses that kind of thing.
Yes, yeah, we want our theories to be accurate.
Yes,
but I'd rather do the study first and then come out of it all with the theory, which is kind of what I did with the Oak Island, investigations that I've been party to since 2004, and long before that, but in a real active way since about 2004.
Yes, and here that's a segue to Oak Island, yes?
Oh, yes, and the Allegons. Actually, Buff, we were speaking earlier off the air, and you mentioned that one of your students, Rodney, was at Oak Island, I believe, correct? And there's some type of connection between the pouch on Chief Joseph and Oak Island, so we can actually touch on that also on the other side?
Absolutely, but just to clarify, Rodney was not at Oak Island. Rodney was with me down visiting the Nez Perce artifacts and the museum and the archive center and so on, and that's also part of finishing phase one. We have to go back there. There are a number of finishing touches that are necessary to complete phase one before we can really enter phase two.
Yes,
which we can also return to in phase two of your program.
Hey, very good. Oh, well done. Very well done.
And Buff, that exhibit is planned hopefully to be done in Qatar, correct?
Well, we'd like to premiere it in Qatar in a museum named after one of the real prominent sheikhs of the area, who has an interest in ancient artifacts. And, I brought an artifact, a piece of the cofferdam from Oak Island to Sheikh Duej Al Khalifa, one of the prominent sheikhs of Bahrain, the brother-in-law of the king of Bahrain, and his cousin as well. And presented it to him in a very formal, ceremonial way. So he has a piece of the cofferdam of Oak Island, and we're looking toward that direction for financing the freeze circle that would be required ultimately to, I think, do the kind of excavation that's necessary at the bottom of the money pit.
Okay.
Because it's so extensive under there. All those boreholes that they've got on the island and so on, Oak Island, are away from the money pit, but they still found things even in the boreholes.
Well, so that's exactly where we're going to go in the next hour. We're going to go into the money pit, Oak Island, and also where it all began for you, and that was at the Decoding the Shepherd's Monument. And we're coming up on a break, Buff, so can we continue the discussion on the other side?
Absolutely.
Great.